Hello everyone, this is Kayvon and I want to add some more analysis to my journal. This time I want to talk about Solana and I'll add it to this page as this is other than from educational purposes, I consider it as my journal as well. I'll probably record a video of this in Persian as well. So this time I want to talk about Solana. And for the people who have been following our page a few months ago, maybe about half a year ago, when the market cap of Solana was around $7 billion, I started posting some stories and mentioning it. And at the time, I considered it as a good project. I still consider it as a good project in terms of the idea and the innovation behind it. It's definitely very interesting, but I have some concerns now, especially now that the token price has gone up significantly. Right now we are about 10 times the price at that point in time when I started mentioning it, and I want to explain what are my concerns. So my concerns are twofold, or in two categories. One is from a qualitative point of view, and the other one is more tokenomics or quantitative point of view. So in this video, I'll talk more about the quantitative point of view or tokenomics point of view of it. And before that, I have to explain my mental model around Solana. And I obviously compare it to a project or a blockchain that I consider a very successful with a huge potential in the future. So, and the reason is I consider, as I said, I consider Solana a good project. So if I'm not going to compare it to something I don't believe in at all, because versus comparing to many of those, it's definitely a really good one, but I have some concerns. So my mental model around Solana comes from my background in wireless networks and decentralized wireless networks as well. And in wireless networks, you have also the problem of scalability in some way in terms of your throughput and number of devices that the network can cover. And the solution for that has been some sort of encoding. So the encoding usually happens either in time encoding or if I remember correctly, this is from years ago, I think we called that TDMA, and also frequency encoding. So with time, basically you manage time really well such that the overlap of different devices sending packages at the same time doesn't happen, and then this way you can increase the scalability of throughputs of the network. And with the frequency, you just encode the signal each device uses differently. And again, all these devices can communicate with the server at the same time. And this means that you again increase the scalability of your network. And recently, I mean, after that, obviously there were a combination of both time and frequency encoding. Now, I see Solana as kind of a time frequency encoding, just to have, this is not obviously 100% accurate, it's more to have a mental model to be able to compare things and to digest and understand them easier, because blockchains are relatively new compared to wireless networks. So with this time, what has happened with this time encoding, let's call it time encoding, what has happened is the requirement for a node has gone higher in terms of computation, and that's why you need more sophisticated nodes to run the Solana blockchain. What this means is that it becomes obviously more centralized, because not every person can run such a node. You need special devices, etc. And this is relative to especially Ethereum. Now, it gives it scalability though. But if you look at Ethereum, it looks as if it's not a scalable blockchain, but it's actually doing that in I'll call it a frequency encoding version. What I mean by this is, it basically, with the layer 2s and the sequencers on layer 2s, you see that they encode large batches of transactions into one kind of transaction, not exactly into one, but to make it simple, it's like 2-1 transaction, and then they put that on chain. So basically they reduce the amount of computation that has happened on chain. A lot of computation happens on the sequencer, and that's the interesting part, because now the sequencer also has to be a bit more sophisticated than a node on layer 1. And you can see that with StarkX, for example, sequencers, and which puts, for example, ZK proofs on chain. Now, this is kind of, I feel, becomes equivalent because to Solana, because now on layer 2 you have a bit more centralization, more sophisticated devices to run the sequencer, and then you get scalability. But it's a 2-layered system instead of 1-layer scalable system like Solana. So it's interesting. So basically, if you look at them from a very high level, you see that they solve scalability in a very similar way. It's some type of encoding, and it's more centralization and more complicated computation and more sophisticated machines. Now we go to the tokenomics, and this now relates to tokenomics. But I have to explain this part as well, that I feel mixing the two is gonna be a bit difficult, both the time encoding and the frequency encoding. Again, remember that these are just mental models to explain and digest this easier. I feel mixing the two will be difficult, so I personally don't see Solana having layer 2s that easily. Of course, it's a new world and I might be proven wrong, but right now I feel it's not going to be easy. And it doesn't make as much sense because you are already scalable on layer 1. Why do you need that much more scalability on layer 2, except you need a huge amount of transactions? But the bigger problem is in tokenomics now, because on layer 1 of Solana, your transaction cost is already very low. And everyone says, oh, amazing. And that's amazing. That's a good thing. The problem with that is, if you look at it from a node operator, it makes sense. They stake Sol and they get a huge amount of rewards in Sol, and good. From an investor or a user who wants to use this network, and at the same time, because of participating, they're kind of, because in blockchains we're not really users alone, we are kind of user/investor. It's like being in a country like US, you're user of the US dollar, but you're also investing in the US dollar, and then rise of the US dollar valuation helps you when you go to other countries, etc. Now, here is, or you want to buy things from another country, here is kind of similar. So for the user/investor, it's not that interesting, I think, because the cost of transaction is very low. So the circulation of value in term denominated in the asset, which is Sol, is quite low now compared to something like Ethereum. Yes, you gave scalability, you reduced the transaction cost, but you are basically reducing the incentive for the token value or its market cap to increase. Especially if you compare to ETH, where the layer 1 has huge transaction fees and then burns a huge amount of it, a large portion of it. So now when we compare these two, we see, okay, yes, here, Solana, we have a huge amount of scalability, good for the user when they just want to transact. When we only look at it from the perspective of the cost of transaction. Here, layer 1 is not good for the user. But then you have layer 2. Layer 2, people laughed at it a couple of years ago, but it's happening now. It's happening on StarkX, it's happening on Arbitrum, Optimism PBC, and a few others, Loopring, etc. So here the layer 2 kind of solves this problem and reduce the transaction, and we are going to see more and more of that. The reduction of cost is going to happen more and more. Especially we see this on special case layer 2s, such as the ones StarkX used by DYDX or Immutable X. But okay, so for the user we kind of solve this on the layer 2. On the layer 1, it's extremely secure as well, because it's very expensive, so it makes it also extremely secure. And banks can use it. So banks, for example, can make their own kind of like layer 2s, simplified layer 2s, and put a huge amount of batch of transactions on the layer 1. So it gives interesting two-tiered level usage for big users, corporates, and then for the normal average user or retail user. But Solana, you basically made it available to retail from layer 1. And that's kind of the promise, and I think it's going to get flipped in the future. And I'll explain in another video how I see that get flipped. That Solana might not be very good for maybe, I mean, that's a lower possibility I'm thinking about, but might not be very good for the retail user actually. It gets flipped and it's only good for centralized entities. Now, going back to the tokenomics, I don't see Solana being able to solve this very easily, except if they increase the cost somehow. So either they ask developers, okay, if you want to use our services, you have to stake a certain amount. So then you increase this staking, not in the blockchain, not in the nodes itself, but in kind of higher levels of the blockchain. And or they say, okay, we increase the transaction fee, or maybe some other way of increasing the cost so that the costs or the circulation of Solana goes higher, the usage of the token Solana goes higher, and when the usage of something goes higher, it means its demand is going higher, and then the price can go up. Other than this, I don't see it happening. And I think the developer, the founders, and also the VC funds behind Solana know this, but they're keeping it quiet right now. Basically, they're giving a service for almost free or at a very cheap price to get traction, and then once they have enough number of users, they start saying increase the cost somehow, right? Which we do not know exactly how it's going to be like. But at that point, it becomes a little bit less attractive to compare to now. It's almost like any other business these days we see when they want to have the network effects, like a Uber or something. In the beginning, they give like huge discounts and then they raise their costs. But if I look at it from an investment point of view, from risk reward, I feel like the risk is getting higher because we don't exactly know if there's a real good solution, and we don't know if that solution is going to work. While ETH, from a tokenomics point of view, it's working, and L2s are coming. So again, it's all about probabilistic. What I'm saying is not 100% assessment, but I see a good percentage with a good probability that from a risk reward perspective, Ethereum is better, if the token is better. And this is just looking at it from a tokenomics point of view. I didn't talk about qualitative point of view, which is about the values and decentralization and things like that. So I'll talk about that in another video. Thanks for listening, and hope it was interesting for you.